The rain had been falling since late afternoon, sheets of water chasing their car down the highway as Jake gripped the wheel. Claire sat in the passenger seat, her knees pulled up, humming along to the faint music coming from the speakers. Sarah was in the back, her forehead resting against the window, watching the blur of trees and neon signs streak past. Their weekend camping trip had been ruined by the storm, but no one had the heart to say it out loud. Instead, they kept driving until the headlights caught a crooked sign with faded letters. Blue Pine Motel. The place looked worn down. It kind of stopped people passing without a second glance. But to them, it was better than turning around and admitting defeat. Jake pulled into the gravel lot, the tires crunching under the rain, and the three of them sat for a moment, listening to the storm slam against the roof of the car. Claire gave a quick laugh, half out of nerves, and said, "Well, looks like this is home tonight." Sarah grinned, shaking her damp hair out of her face, pushed open the door. Inside, the motel smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. The lobby was barely more than a counter and a rack of postcards no one bought anymore. The man at the desk slid them a single brass key with the number 6 etched into it. One room, one bed, no questions asked. They exchanged a glance, half amused, half curious, then hurried down the hall, their shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The room was small, with wallpaper curling at the edges and a buzzing lamp that gave off a warm golden glow. The bedspread was patterned in faded blue, and the couch near the window looked like it had seen better years. None of it mattered. They tossed their bags down and collapsed onto the furniture. The sound of rain filling the silence between them. Jake leaned back against the headboard, watching the girls laugh as they argued over who got the couch. Sarah claimed it first, but Claire wrestled a pillow from her hands, both of them tumbling onto the bed in a fit of giggles. For a moment, Jake just watched, a small smile tugging at his lips. These were his best friends. Messy, unpredictable, and somehow still is after all these years. Claire finally gave in and flopped beside Jake, breathless from laughing. Sarah stretched out across the couch, hugging a blanket to her chest, her eyes shining with something softer than amusement. The storm outside grew heavier, rattling the window. But inside, there was a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. They ordered takeout from the only diner still open, eating fries and pies straight from the boxes while sitting cross-legged on the bed. Stories started to flow. Old college memories, embarrassing mistakes, dreams they hadn't said out loud in years. The hours slipped by quickly, their voices rising and falling with laughter, then softening into long pauses where the weight of unspoken things pressed closer. Claire's gaze lingered on Jake when she thought he wasn't looking. Sarah's smile faltered every time she caught it. Jake pretended not to notice, his chest tightening with a mix of fear and longing. None of them wanted to break the fragile magic of the night. Not yet. When the food was gone and the music from Jake's phone played low in the background, the three of them leaned back, shoulders brushing, eyes drifting toward the cracked ceiling. The storm was still raging outside. But here in this forgotten motel on the side of the road, the world felt far away. And though none of them would admit it out loud, each one knew something had shifted the moment they walked into room 6. This night was not going to be like all the others. Something was waiting in the hours ahead, something they had been avoiding for far too long. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm, tapping against the motel window like a second heartbeat. The food carton sat half empty on the nightstand, the smell of fries and coffee still hanging in the air. Jake sat cross-legged on the bed, absent, mindedly scrolling through songs on his phone until he landed on one they all knew from years ago. The soft melody filled the room, pulling them back to a time when life had felt lighter. Claire leaned against the headboard, her knees drawn up to her chest, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. Sarah stretched out on the couch, wrapped in the thin motel blanket, staring at the ceiling with a thoughtful look in her eyes. At first, the talk was casual, old memories of classes they had skipped, the road trips that nearly went wrong, the nights when they had stayed up until sunrise just because they could. Their laughter echoed off the thin walls, warming the room more than the weak heater ever could. But then slowly the mood shifted. It wasn't sudden, just the kind of change you only notice when the laughter fades and silence lingers a little too long. Claire was the first to break it. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain, as she said, "Do you ever think about how different things would be if we'd made braver choices back then?" Jake lifted his head, caught off guard. Sarah shifted on the couch, her eyes moving from Claire to Jake, as though she had been waiting for that question to appear. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, though deep down he already knew. Claire smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held more sadness than joy. "Hey, we were always so close, you and me, and yet we never—" She stopped, her voice faltering. "We never let ourselves see what could have happened." The words hung heavy in the air. Jake didn't answer right away. His chest tightened. memories pressing in late nights walking Claire home. The times their hands had brushed and he had pulled back. The stolen looks that had always ended too soon. He had felt it, the possibility of something more. But fear had always stepped in. Sarah sat up, hugging the blanket tighter. Her heart beat faster because she had known this conversation would come someday. She had seen the way Claire's eyes lingered on Jake. She had noticed the way Jake tried too hard to look away. And though she had told herself she was fine being the friend in the middle, she couldn't help the pang of longing that struck her whenever she imagined being the one he looked at that way. "Maybe you're both forgetting something," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't just fear. Timing was never right. There was always something: exams, jobs, other people. It's not like you wasted years on purpose. Claire glanced at her, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I know, but still, sometimes I wonder if we should have fought harder for it." The storm outside rumbled, a low growl that seemed to echo the tension in the room. Jake finally spoke, his voice low. "I used to think about it all the time, but I didn't want to ruin what we had. The three of us, it was perfect. I was scared that if I said something, it would all fall apart." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. She had no words for a moment, only silence. Then with a shaky laugh, she said, "Funny, isn't it? We spent years being so careful, protecting something that was already breaking in its own way." That silence returned heavier this time, pressing against them like the weight of the storm. Claire's hand shifted on the bedspread, almost reaching for Jake's before stopping. Sarah noticed her chest atching, but she didn't look away. She wanted to see it, wanted to face the truth, even if it hurt. "I don't want to keep wondering," Claire whispered suddenly, her voice trembling, her eyes locked with Jake's. And for the first time, she didn't look away. Jake felt the air leave his lungs. He had dreamed of this moment more times than he could count. Yet, now that it was here, he didn't know what to do. He glanced at Sarah, whose expression was unreadable, and guilt cut through him like a knife. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want to hurt either of them. Sarah broke the silence again, her voice softer now, almost tender. "Maybe it's not about choosing or regretting. Maybe it's about being honest. Been carrying these feelings around for so long, and none of us ever dared to put them into words. Maybe tonight, maybe we finally do." Her words trembled, but they were steady enough to push the air back into the room. Claire reached out then, her hand brushing Jake's, and this time she didn't pull away. The touch was small, simple, but it carried years of longing. Jake froze, torn between relief and fear. Sarah watched them, her hands clutching the blanket so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "I don't know what happens if we do this," Jake admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know if we lose everything tomorrow, but I'm tired of pretending." Claire's eyes softened. "Me, too." Sarah exhaled slowly, her heart breaking and healing all at once. She had always known this was where things would lead. Yet part of her had hoped differently. Still, she couldn't bring herself to look away. She reached across the small space and laid her hand over Claire's, surprising even herself. The three of them sat there in silence, hands tangled on the bedspread, rain pounding against the glass. It wasn't an answer. Not yet, but it was a beginning. For the first time in years, none of them were pretending anymore. And though fear still lingered, so did hope. Something was shifting in that motel room, something fragile and powerful, and they all felt it deep in their bones. The night was far from over. The storm outside grew heavier, rain hammering the window until it sounded like the glass might crack. Inside the small motel room, though, it was quieter than ever. The three of them sat close, their hands touching, their breaths uneven. Words had been spoken that could not be taken back, and now there was nothing left but silence. Jake's heart pounded. He could feel Claire's hand resting lightly in his, warm and steady. Yet his eyes kept flicking towards Sarah. She sat at the edge of the couch, her fingers still holding on to theirs, her face caught between a smile and something harder to name. He wished he could read her mind, wished he could know if she felt betrayed or relieved. Claire broke the silence first. "This doesn't have to ruin anything," she said softly, her voice almost trembling. "We've always been honest with each other. Maybe this is just another part of that honesty." Sarah let out a small laugh, one that didn't quite sound like laughter. "Honesty," she repeated as though testing the word. Her eyes were bright, but not with tears. It was something else, something sharper, like longing and fear mixed together. "We've spent years hiding from each other, and now we're supposed to believe we can handle the truth." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. She was right. For years they had built their friendship on unspoken rules. Don't cross lines. Don't admit too much. Don't risk the bond that held them together. And yet here they were, sitting in a shabby motel room with a storm outside. All of it unraveling. Claire turned towards Sarah, reaching across the space with her free hand. "I don't want you to feel like you're outside of this. You've always been part of us, Sarah." You're not just watching. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, her chest rising and falling quickly. Then why does it feel like I've been watching for years? She whispered. Jake felt the words like a blow. He had never admitted it, but Sarah had always been there too. In his laughter, in his late-night calls, in the way she could read him before he even spoke. He had leaned on her, trusted her, loved her in a way he could never put into simple categories. She was right. She had been watching. The rain thundered, filling the pause. Claire lowered her eyes, guilt flashing across her face. Jake looked between them, torn apart by the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, he spoke, his voice raw. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know what I want. All I know is I can't lose either of you. Sarah's expression softened, though her hands still gripped the blanket tightly. Maybe you don't have to choose, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Maybe it's not about one or the other. Maybe it's about facing the truth that we all mean more to each other than we've ever admitted. Claire glanced up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Do you really believe that? Sarah nodded, though her throat tightened. I don't know what it looks like tomorrow. I don't know how it works, but I'm tired of pretending I don't feel something too. The words hit the room like lightning bright, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Jake's chest ached, not from confusion, but from relief. For the first time, the feelings he had buried didn't belong to him alone. The three of them sat closer now, the silence turning from heavy to tender. No one rushed to fill it with promises or decisions. Instead, they leaned into the nearness of one another. Claire shifted so her shoulder brushed Sarah's. Jake's hands stayed tangled in theirs, grounding them all. Time slipped by, measured only by the storm. Minutes felt like hours, hours like moments. Sometimes they spoke small things like memories of when they had first met, or the times they almost lost touch, but found each other again. Other times they just sat in quiet, letting the sound of rain speak for them. At one point, Sarah whispered, Do you think people are meant to find each other more than once? Jake tilted his head. What do you mean? I mean, she said, her eyes distant. Maybe some people are just tied together. No matter what happens, they circle back. Maybe that's us. Claire reached for her hand again, squeezing it gently. I think so, she murmured. Because somehow, no matter how much changes, it's still us three. Always. The words settled over them like a blanket, warm and heavy. They didn't know what the morning would bring or if the world outside would understand. But in that motel room, the fear began to loosen its grip. Jake lay back against the headboard. Claire curling beside him, Sarah still on the couch, but leaning closer now, as if pulled by an invisible thread. The space between them had never felt smaller. Their breaths sensed with the rhythm of the storm, steady and calm. It wasn't a confession, not fully. It wasn't a promise either. It was something in between. A fragile acknowledgement that they all belonged to something larger than friendship, but softer than love. Something undefined but undeniable. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full. Full of memories of years of laughter, of hidden glances of unspoken truths finally given room to breathe. And though none of them said it out loud, each one knew they would never forget this night. Not because of the storm or the motel, but because for the first time they had stopped pretending. Morning was still hours away. The storm would pass. But the silence between them, this new fragile silence, was only just beginning. The storm eased sometime after midnight, though none of them noticed at first. The rain softened into a whisper against the glass. The thunder rolled farther away, and the motel settled into stillness. Inside room 6, the three of them were wide awake, stretched across the small space as though the night belonged only to them. Jake lay half, sitting on the bed, Claire curled at his side with her knees tucked up. And Sarah, leaning forward from the couch, blankets still wrapped around her shoulders. Their eyes were heavy, but their hearts beat too fast for sleep. They had already said more than they ever thought they would. Secrets had slipped out, confessions half-formed, the truth laid bare in pieces. Yet somehow the silence between their words felt more powerful than anything else. It was the kind of silence that carried trust, the kind that felt like a promise even before anyone made one. Claire broke it first, her voice soft. Do you think we'll remember this night years from now? Jake turned to look at her. Her face glowed faintly under the lamp's dim light, tired but calm, like someone who had finally let go of something heavy. How could we forget? He said quietly. We've had a lot of nights together, but nothing like this. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter and smiled faintly. It's strange. We've traveled together, laughed until morning, even fought a few times. But this feels different, like we finally stopped holding back. No one disagreed. They all felt it, that invisible shift. They had stepped into new territory, and though none of them knew where it would lead, there was no going back. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I used to think the best night we'd ever have was one of those wild road trips, or maybe graduation. But maybe it's this, sitting in some run-down motel, storm outside, just the three of us finally being real. Claire laughed softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. I think you're right. Sometimes the best things don't look the way we expect. Sarah's eyes softened as she looked at them. And though her chest still ached, there was comfort, too. She whispered for once, I don't feel like I have to hide what I feel. That sentence lingered in the room. Jake and Claire both turned toward her. And for a long moment, the three of them just stared at one another as if trying to memorize every detail. The way the shadows fell across their faces. The way their hands rested close enough to touch. The way their breathing matched. Jake reached across the small space and brushed the Sarah's hand gently, not letting go of Claire's. In the process, the three of them sat linked together, a quiet chain of connection. No words were needed. The gesture said enough. Hours slipped by without them noticing. They drifted from deep conversation to quiet laughter, from playful teasing to stretches of silence where they simply listened to the world outside. At one point, Sarah told a story about the first day she had met Jake and Claire in class. How she had thought they seemed like people she'd never fit in with, only to discover they'd become the two people she couldn't imagine life without. Claire shared a memory of walking alone one night after a bad breakup and how Jake's call had saved her from falling apart. Jake admitted that every time he felt lost, he thought of the two of them first before anyone else. The words weren't dramatic, they weren't even planned, but they held weight. They carried the kind of truth that came only when time and trust had built something strong enough to last. As the night stretched on, the motel room grew quieter. The lamp buzzed softly. The storm faded completely and a thin calm wrapped around. Then Claire shifted until she was lying back on the bed, her head resting near Jake's shoulder. Sarah slid from the couch to the floor, leaning against the side of the bed with her blanket still wrapped around her. They were close, closer than ever before, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt natural, as if this was always how it should have been. Jake whispered, You know, when I think about all the things I could have done differently, all the choices I regret, at least I know I made one right choice. I chose to keep you both in my life. That's what matters. Claire reached for his hand again, squeezing it gently. And we chose you. Both of us. Sarah tilted her head back to look at them, her eyes shining. Then maybe that's all we need. No answers tonight, just this. They didn't argue. They didn't try to label what they were or what would come next. They simply accepted that this night belonged to them, and it would stay with them no matter what the morning brought. At some point, the exhaustion caught up. The three of them ended up lying on the bed together, squeezed in tight but not minding. Sarah rested on one side, Claire on the other, and Jake in the middle, shoulders touching both. None of them spoke as their eyes drifted shut. The silence was steady now, peaceful, filled not with tension, but with trust. The neon sign outside flickered through the thin curtains, casting soft colors across their faces. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and still. The motel was quiet, but inside room 6, something had changed forever for one night. There was no confusion, no fear, no pretending. Just three people who had spent years circling around the truth, finally letting it exist between them without running from it. And though morning would bring questions, the world outside might never understand. None of that mattered now, because for this one night in a small motel on a forgotten road, it was just the three of them. Best friends, best night ever.